strong belief that this is a tool that should be in the tool belt of every successful entrepreneur. And that doesn't mean that every round that you do should have a Reg CF component to it, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. Jason Frishman is here with us on the podcast. Here today, you're hearing that correctly. Jason Frishman, founder, Netcapital, going to go deep into the world of investment crowdfunding, one of the authorities in the space. Jason, thanks for taking the time to hop on the podcast today.
Of course, very happy to be here. Always happy to spend some time with you and with Jason Fishman and Jason Frishman together. I'm not sure anything can stop us or there's anything we can't accomplish. So definitely looking forward to this.
I wholeheartedly agree, and had actually heard of you for a couple of years before meeting you firsthand. And your team had warned me. They said, "Hey, one day you may get a text that's directed towards Jason Frishman. It's
Right.
if that ever happens, please let us know." And it did happen once. Nothing sensitive.
Yeah. But same story the other way around. I had heard people on my team talking about Jason Fishman and I was getting confused. Like I didn't know if my team didn't know my name. And then the way they were, marketing has historically not been, I would say, my personal strength. So some of the context that they were saying, Jason Fishman, I'm like, I don't even think you know what I do. And it turns out it was you. And you're phenomenal. We've had the pleasure of getting to know each other more over the last couple of years. I would say we've done some panels together, some in-person events. This is our first time doing a virtual podcast, but I have a tremendous amount of respect for you personally and for what you've built with DNA. And we've had a lot of success together and hope to continue to build that with you and your firm.
I really appreciate that. And I hadn't heard that story from the other side. I've had a blast with you on the panels, hanging out at Investment Week and various different events, tag teaming on different capital raises. I'm always impressed by Netcapital and what you guys are doing, what you've been able to create, the presence over the past few years. So I have definitely been looking forward to this conversation. And to start out, thought we can begin with your background. Where did it all begin and how did it lead to the world of investment crowdfunding?
Yeah, certainly happy to do that. And just one last note on our relationship. I think one of the reasons why we've jived so well as companies is I think we're both very customer first and service oriented. I know you've worked with other platforms. We've certainly worked with other marketing firms, and our team has always found that when we have a customer that's both of our mutual customers, we're just on the same page with respect to putting the customer first. Those needs first and doing what we can to make sure the customer is happy and successful. And so we've always really appreciated that about you.
Absolutely. Authentically, we, try not to play, any type of favoritism or, anything like that. But I always talk up Netcapital, mention you guys provide white glove service so that, customer first approach. And I think it's needed. I think the success rates in the industry are better than offline capital raising for companies of these stages, but there's a lot of room for growth. So any resources that can be put forth. I see your team going the extra mile. I know we've had a lot of success together on capital raises over the past couple of years. And we're always trying to get that information out with case studies on Avidane and EarthGrid and a variety of different issuers you've had the chance to work with firsthand. So very glad to hear the feeling's mutual.
Definitely. So, yeah, I mean, with respect to my background, it's actually probably different than you might expect. We've never really spoken too much into this, but I was doing cancer research at Dana Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. My undergraduate degree was in neuroscience, and I always sort of thought I'd be in that world. And I'll spare the long story, but I'd say I got relatively disillusioned with the process of scientific research, mostly the pace. At which you can really do things that start to affect real people. And I just sort of wanted to try my hand elsewhere. And I got connected with a friend of mine who had started his own startup company. And it was a very small team, cool idea. I kind of liked what they were doing. And so I decided to hop in and, with both feet and say, hey, how can I help? How can I be a part of this? And as we all know, probably everybody who's watching as well, like fundraising just becomes priority A, B, or C, or all three in an early stage venture. And so it just sort of naturally became part of my responsibility to help with fundraising. And I knew nothing about this space at all. To me, like the entire financial markets was this black box that didn't really make any sense. Um, Being in that room and at those tables in those meetings trying to raise capital for an early stage startup company myself, I was blown away by the chaos and inefficiencies that basically controlled the outcomes. And we would leave meetings with, $75,000 checks, $100,000 checks, but I would feel like it made no sense. Like the way in which we were, the companies were being diligenced, the way in which investors got access to deals, the way in which we were compared or not compared to other companies that were in our space. It felt like the process by which investors and early stage companies interact in the financial markets just didn't make a whole lot of sense from both perspectives, both from my hat as, being on the company side, but also putting on the investor hat of like, we mostly were networking in because we were fortunate enough to know people who knew people. And, we were lucky enough to get in the meeting, and not a lot of companies can even get into the meeting. And so once you get in the meeting, your percent chances of success are increased, and et cetera, and so on. And so it was around that time, it was about, mid 2015 that I started thinking, would there be a way to basically wrap a technology solution around this? And I remember at the time, I actually went to the founder of the company that I was working with, and I said, why? I found this thing called Kickstarter. Like, why can't we use Kickstarter? Kickstarter seems great. You can raise money online. We don't have to fly all around the country to go meet with these wealthy people. Like, we can just raise money from the people who will ultimately use our product. And the founder was like, no, we don't want to do that. That's not an investment. That's product pre-sales, and we'd have to worry about fulfillment. It would be a total mess. We definitely don't want to do that. I'm like, oh, geez, okay. And then in October of 2015 is when the SEC finally wrote down the rules for Title III of the Jobs Act, which ultimately is Reg CF, which is the basic core security exemption that we use at Netcapital. And I saw that and sort of thought, I think this is a framework that can unlock this asset class and with respect to use of the internet. And I think that's where a lot of other people sort of viewed it differently as like, hey, this will allow us to be Kickstarter, but for equity. And for me, it was, this will allow us to use the internet to apply it to an asset class that's been locked down forever, and bring it to the forefront in a way that's really powerful. And so that's sort of the origin story of how I ended up founding the company.
I love it. And I actually hadn't heard those details before, and have some similarities myself, working on capital raises around 2010, social gaming startup, over 75 different versions of the pitch deck I physically created, participating in all those meetings and seeing all the inefficiencies.
Yeah,
And heard about Reg CF in 2014, and that it was a matter of when, not if. Had advertising live day one when it activated in 2016, and have been preaching it ever since as this tool to provide access to investors for founders and early deal flow for both retail and accredited investors. I believe we're in the early chapters of it, and I'm still explaining to people,
certainly.
What it is every day.
Yeah,
So you're working on the tech Kickstarter, and you have your background, cancer research, scientific research. Found that you liked working in the startup world more, effective at capital raising, but still noticing, hey, with what I've done in the past, I could tell you there's 10 different things we could do better here. Let's build
yeah,
a tech stack. How did that go?
yeah. I mean, like I was effective, but I every stereotype box. Like I was a young white male in Boston, Massachusetts, with my founder was also a young white male in Boston, Massachusetts, and we were just he happened to be very plugged in to the venture community through his family. And so it's
Okay.
like all of the inefficiencies that exist were advantageous to us, which was great for us, but like from my point of view, for the world, not great. Like if you were a minority woman in Grand Rapids, Michigan, like I don't know how you would even start. And that's what sort of had my mind going. And also like the entrepreneurs that can be successful in those sorts of communities, they have so much additional adversity to overcome. To me, it's more likely that those entrepreneurs are more successful. It becomes almost like a culture of entrepreneurship in the main hubs like Boston and New York and San Francisco, where you start to have people who probably aren't natural entrepreneurs and aren't naturally gifted in those skill sets, who just sort of turn there because there's such a community around it. Whereas to succeed in a without those advantages, I think really speaks a lot to that individual's character and skill set with respect to entrepreneurship. And when you talk about efficiency, that was also one of the things that I really think is a massive benefit of Reg CF that isn't spoken about as frequently as maybe it should be. I think people know, with Reg CF, it's efficient because you can tell the world, you can use general solicitation, you can hire a marketing firm like DNA, and that creates efficiency. Another way in which it creates efficiency, though, is the way in which you engage in fundraising is much more inclusive to the rest of your business. And so, like when you're flying to Sand Hill Road going door to door to venture firms, it's a very binary investment of your time, because either that investment firm or angel investor will write you a check, in which case it was a great use of your time, or they won't. And it's most likely just a waste of your time, frankly. And the other potential outcome is maybe they could make an introduction and you could start all over again and reinvest the time on another lead. But typically it's binary, yes or no. Whereas the sorts of exposure and efforts that you're putting in to your fundraising when you're doing it on a platform is much more inclusive. We've had dozens, maybe probably hundreds of companies that have told us, like, we've seen product sales increase as a result of being on the platform. Because if you have thousands of investors looking at your offering, it's very likely some of those investors will say, hey, let me try the product first before I choose to invest. And so the sort of brand exposure and effort that you put into a Reg CF campaign, I think, is much more efficient than the old way of raising capital.
And without that repetition, think of all that energy that's spent for each meeting, each
Sure.
conversation. You're looking at, sales closing rates. So, the majority of those conversations, large majority, aren't going to amount to anything. To be able to really polish that presentation into an offering page, have a pitch video that encapsulates a lot of the key areas of the presentation that a sit down would consist of. Then, your vertical pitch deck living on the offering page, flooded with social proof, third-party validation, and then being able to see the sign-off. I actually quote you, Jason, when we were on the panel in the fall, October 2023, feels like a blur now. You said everyone wants to be first to be second.
Right.
And that is a present aspect of the offering pages, where you can see, hey, 300 investors have invested in this deal, over 300K raised. I think those numbers speak very loudly. And, I make a lot of these offline, online comparisons. So I know offline investors were always looking for that. Who else is in this deal? Have you looked at any accelerators? What else is going on? And that's front and center on those pages.
Yeah, I think people just, feel more comfortable when there's validation, for sure. And they look for validation in people that they trust. And if not people that they trust, then, masses, many people that can sort of create that trust. But
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just to play another joke on our names, when I quote you, people think I'm talking in third person.
you quote yourself. I like that. All right, I'm gonna have to quote you. I'm gonna have to figure out what I can quote you. I like that.
As Jason Frishman once said, and they're like, "Is something in his mouth? Is he talking in third
Yeah,
person right now?"
yeah. The
But
R makes all the difference.
I like it, and I do mention that, and I mention it regularly because it speaks to what's happened in the world of venture capital forever and is living online. I definitely believe it's a marketing play. That's why I've chosen to focus so much energy on the marketing side of these raises. I've seen sales, I've seen franchise partners, all types of strategic partners press come out of this vehicle of fundraising as well. So beyond just the capital, I mean, hey, if you're getting thousands of investors and raising millions of dollars, just the sheer peer-to-peer marketing that's going to occur from those new ambassadors that come in, even on with a small investment, virtually, can be very powerful.
Yeah, it's funny because one of the things I learned very quickly when I was raising capital, one of my very first investors required me to go to a professional sales training course because, my
Hmm.
background's Dana Farber. I really had no like professional experience in the business world starting my company. And he wanted me to go to a professional sales training course. And what I learned there was I just applied it to my fundraising. I all the people next to me were applying it to whatever product sale or software sale they were selling, and I was just applying it to my fundraising. And ultimately, like, raising capital is just as much selling equity as it is raising capital. That's something that I harp on all the time with issuers is you are not raising money. You're not asking people for money. This is not a donation. You are selling a very valuable asset, the only valuable asset you probably have available to you to sell, which is your equity. And it's an opportunity that these investors have historically simply never had. You're giving them an opportunity to invest and purchase a valuable asset that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. And that's an important distinction that I think successful entrepreneurs can make, where you're not asking for money, you're selling your equity. And ultimately, the most revolutionary tool we as a society have ever created with respect to sales is the internet. And the internet has been barred from use for security sales until now. It's phenomenal. And so that's what I saw when the Jobs Act was written was, wow, like we're unleashing the internet to solve a problem that desperately needs to be solved. And financial markets move slowly, and it's a heavily regulated space, and it's difficult to get adoption in financial markets, I think, in general. And so I think adoption has been a little bit slower than all of us had probably hoped back in 2016. But I think we're making good progress. And to me, it's a matter of, when, not if, as you said. Every private company, on earth has a place where people can buy and sell their stock on the internet.
Really like how you said that. You're not asking people for money. You're selling them shares. You're
Right.
providing them the opportunity. I learned that early stage with DNA, where I didn't really ask for money, and we're a service-based business. It's different, but at the same time, I try to think of the founders of some of these startups, and as they grow, as they hit different milestones, the people around them, they're going to ask questions if they weren't offered the opportunity to invest early on, especially at these different minimums, $100, $500 minimum. You're giving them the opportunity to grow with you, in my perspective, and going after those first degree audiences, having a proactive founder to do so. I've noticed as a consistent in all of the successful campaigns. I like to say the most proactive founders have the most successful raises. Seen it with Brad Larson, with Avadain, who not only brought in first degree network and created that initial crowd to then be scaled with digital, incorporating the internet, like you said.
Yep.
He was bringing in large investors. We'd be able to showcase that on the offering page, see a spike in weeks to follow. He'd pitch with the Harvard Angels Network. He'd get featured by the Gilder Report or King's Crowd or any number of these third parties, and then be able to amplify. I think that's what the internet really allows for. When I picture a successful Reg CF, I'm envisioning 50,000 visitors per $1 million raised, reflecting a 2% conversion rate. Google says average is 2.35. 1,000 investors off that, $1,000 average each. King's Crowd has all of the analytics on Reg CFs and said $1,100 was the average investment across all of them for 2023. And if you're having this amazing pitch, instead of just going to one group, one individual at a time, have it live on the digital offering. As you're getting more traction and getting more press and getting more momentum, have it showcased on your offering page, have it
Yep.
showing up in the content and the ads, and just continue to amplify. That's what digital really allows for, is that scale.
And amplification. I love that. I remember there was a company, this is relatively early on, definitely a few years back, and they had an angel investor who wanted to invest $300,000, and they didn't know whether to close that before the offering started or close it after the offering started as part of the raise on the platform. And, obviously we're a little biased, but we kind of suggested, hey, like, everybody wants to be first to be second. If you have somebody that wants to be first, that's valuable. And if you do it in a format where you can amplify it, that's valuable. And so they ended up taking our advice and they ran that investment through the platform when they started their offering. And when we announced them to our user base, they were extremely successful because it allowed them to amplify the success that, maybe or maybe not they would have had without the platform in terms of that first $300,000 investment. But they were able to use that success and amplify it in a way that they otherwise wouldn't be able to achieve additional goals. And so they were really happy with that. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs as a whole should think more about. Like, how do I leverage this success into more success? Like, ultimately, startups, it's all about momentum, always momentum. Like, regardless of how you're raising, if you're on a platform, if you're doing it the old fashioned way, if you're going to an angel group, if you're going to friends and family, like, what they want to hear is that you're building. Every day you're building. Every single time I talk to one of my investors, I have an update for them. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. It's just to let them know, hey, we're doing something. And if you can't think of an update, then you did something wrong in the last 24 hours or a week or month or however that time period is between when you last spoke to your investors and now. You have to be building. You have to create momentum. Ultimately, that fear of missing out really drives action. The train has to feel like it's leaving the station. We're all on the train, all aboard. Let's go. We're going with or without you. We don't need you, but if you want to join, we'd love to have you. But we're going and we're on this mission and we're on this path. And that momentum is so critical in building that sort of viewpoint around your business and your deal.
The optics are crucial. If you go to an offering on your platform and it looks the same as when you visited it 3 months ago, it says something. You go to a different issuer's offering page, there's more investments that have occurred, more capital, presented to you as soon as you get there. You look at the portal updates. They were at this conference last week. They're featured from this podcast the week before. They put together a new partnership. Look at this industry report. Look at these product features. Following compliance, of course. But that says something in a much more amplified way. And we'll take it to content channels. We'll run it in advertising. We'll look to drive traffic in and nurture those prospects with the content coming through. But I say very similar things with the momentum and a moving ship, and it's going with or without you. You got to hop on. The fear of missing out. Well, and because it's true. When I look at the most successful deals, it's the crowd effect that occurs, which is exactly what you're describing. And as an issuer, what you want to be communicating to these prospective investors.
It's because it's true, and because we have strikingly similar names, and because like all like it's what matters too. And I think most issuers get it, I think, and some don't. And I don't, those who don't quite understand that, I think will struggle to raise capital in any way, not whether it's on a platform, the old fashioned way, any of the platforms, it doesn't really matter. It is fundraising. Both of us, Jason, we both, have built companies to make fundraising easier, to make it more efficient, to make it more accessible. But still, at the end of the day, fundraising is the responsibility of the founder, CEO, entrepreneur themselves. Like, we're not a magic pill that you can take and wake up tomorrow morning with $1 million in your checking account. That's just not how the world works. Like, you do have to put in that groundwork. You have to put in that hustle. It doesn't matter what path you choose to accomplish your fundraising goals. You can't skirt the work. The work has to be there. Both the work within your business and also the work on fundraising specifically. We, I think, between DNA and Netcapital, try to remove as much of the superfluous work that probably doesn't really add a lot of value, that really you shouldn't need to focus on, that maybe you would go in other models. We try to remove a lot of the superfluous work, but there's still hard work that has to be done.
Can't skirt the work. That's a fact. And these are just tools.
Yeah.
I try to be as transparent as I can with prospective issuers, live issuers. Hey, only so many groups hit the $1 million mark, this level, that level. That's not to scare you away. It's to say, use these tools, do the work, maximize the impact of these tools. That they are effective if you manage them to a point of effectiveness. Merely launching a campaign isn't going to do it. Like you said, once you hit different milestones, Netcapital's audience is going to respond to a much greater degree. The
Right.
larger Reg CF audience, anyone who's ever invested in a Reg CF deal, maybe, advertisements get directed towards them, content. Now they see it, more and more and more momentum stacking on top of that. And you can get there. And with all the
Yep.
favorable aspects of filing Form C, with valuation and what you're able to do in terms of long-term direction of the board and company, which isn't always true with venture capital partners, and not speaking poorly about anything there, but there's just a lot of great aspects to equity crowdfunding. But you have to market it. You have to do everything you can to sell those securities.
Yeah, and it's the number one thing that, that's something that's old as time, that invest in the team, invest in the people, especially at the early stages. That's really what matters. That's the differentiator. And it's no different here. That's how we get comfortable when we think a company can be successful. And one of the red flags that we look for is when a company is really like hyper fixated on, how much money are you going to raise us?
Yeah.
Like, because, we've been doing this now for years, right? We've had a tremendous amount of success with a large variety of companies in many different ways. And so we say ultimately these are tools. There's no doubt that this tool will be successful for you if you use it right.
Mm-hmm.
Just like there's no doubt that Microsoft Word will be successful if you're going to write a paper. That doesn't mean your paper is going to be good, but it won't be Microsoft Word's fault. You need to be able to use this technology to be successful. We know that we've built technology that can enable you to successfully raise $5 million through Reg CF consistently and effectively. Ultimately, it depends on the company, the entrepreneur, to be able to resonate and amplify their message with not only our audience, but with their own audiences, and use whatever tools are available to them, whether that's DNA or otherwise, to continue to be successful at getting their message out and turning attention into activated investors.
Great recommendation, and I speak to those founders as well that are just interested in how much other groups can raise versus how digital can amplify and how they can get the traffic, how they can get everything there.
Exactly.
I speak to the groups that are more focused on the cost of capital than the actual success of the round, meaning they think the success is just assumed, and I have to put the brakes on and say, hey, these are variables, that there's inherent risk, marketing, raising capital. It's not running a startup or any company mid stage at that. That there's not any type of guarantee across the board. So it's a matter of making all of the right choices, making all the right directions, putting the right effort to maximize what you could get there. And I could see how different agencies, different groups in the space can overpromise and then be in a more difficult situation for everybody versus
Yeah.
teaming up, seeing how they could get there. What contrasts would you say you've seen in the space from 2016 to today? How has Reg CF evolved, and where do you envision it going?
Well, I mean, the obvious answer to that is the increase in. Oh, did I lose you?
No, still here.
Oh, sorry. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is the increase in the Reg CF limit from 1 million to 5 million. Um, you read that and you would think, wow, this is a 500% increase in the space, but it's so much more than that, because what it did was it took an enormous sector of the private capital markets who looked at the $1 million cap yearly and thought, you know what, this just doesn't move the needle. It's not worth the investment in time or resources to go through this process just to raise $1 million. To a $5 million every year, mind you, not just $5 million once, $5 million every year. That moves the needle for just about every private company on earth. And so it completely changed the dynamics of the industry and the sorts of companies that we could approach. And I think one of the things that held the industry back actually was that $1 million cap for the first 5 or so years, because I think it kind of pigeonholed the space into early stage startups, which probably isn't even the best use of the space. It can be, but I gave a whole TED talk on how companies are going public much later in their life cycle. And if you go back in time, 25 years, companies that currently are private would absolutely be public 25 years ago. And giving those companies access to retail capital is important. And I think that that sort of space is something that our industry hasn't done a great job of breaking into. And part of that is because of this, 5-year start that we had at this $1 million cap, which didn't really allow us to approach larger and more mature companies. So I'd say that's the number one change. Beyond that, obviously, in 2016, I would say just about every person I talked to about this looked at me like I had, 3 heads and 6 eyes. Like I was like
Sure.
explaining something that made no sense, that they had never heard of, whether it's a customer or a potential partner. And today in 2024, I think that it's much more likely that whoever I'm talking to about my business or the industry is at least like somewhat aware, at the very least, that something exists that allows you to raise capital online as a private company. And so that's obviously a good maturation for the space. But then in a lot of ways, a lot is the same. 8 years is a very short amount of time in the financial markets. It's a long time in tech. We're fintech, right? It's a long time in tech, but it's a short time in fin. And so I think a lot is the same. We're still very much in like the first or second inning of what this industry can be. And so I think we got to, continue to keep our heads down, put the customers first, create value, figure out how we can make this asset class accessible for real people so that, everybody thinks of private capital investing as a healthy part of their investment portfolio. And every entrepreneur thinks of online capital raising as a healthy tool in their toolkit when they think about their fundraising needs, and not just their fundraising needs, but their marketing needs. There's just so much value in creating those brand ambassador connections early, mid, and late stage. Having thousands of investors who own your equity, that's irreplaceable in terms of the amount of commitment that earns you, and loyalty that earns you from those individuals.
Online capital investing, well said. I'm seeing that happen as well. I almost remember hearing things in 2016, such as, oh, if someone can't get funded offline, they try equity crowdfunding. Where now I'm seeing groups literally turn down capital offline and position the deal that they want online and being able
Certainly.
to market all the way through. Seeing larger companies that want to bring their customer base in, and envision a lot more of that in years to come, as well as other fintech, other banks, other financial vertical players getting into the space. I think investor success stories are going to get there. Get
Yeah.
us there. I think the founder success stories are there, and know many of the founders who have those at Netcapital directly, and the impact you guys have had in this space. I think the investor success stories through different liquidity events down the line are going to get more mainstream attention, adoption. I picture more mainstream media coverage, and it's fun to think about where everything could be in 5 to 10 years. 2034 sounds pretty exciting for the space. You
Yeah.
emphasized internet. I think this will be primarily on the internet versus primarily off the internet at that point.
Yeah, I hope so. Again, I think it's when, not if. I don't know if 5 years is the right time frame, 10, who knows? But to me, it's inevitable. I want to double click on that control point because I think it's critical. and another value of the space that I think is sometimes overlooked by more mature companies. Like by definition, I think venture firms are great. I think venture firms have a great role in the space. I think they provide a lot of expertise and guidance to the companies that they get involved with, at least some of them. And those are worth going after. But ultimately, like by definition, they take advantage of the inefficiencies in the ways that private companies can get access to capital in order to get good terms. I mean, that's just what
Sure.
they do. There's nothing wrong with it. It's what they do. And in a hyper efficient market, the best companies should really be using this process because they can set their own terms. They can leverage the power of their own popularity to raise capital from their customer bases without having to go to institutional investors who are going to be able to use that inefficiency against them and set terms that are more favorable to the investor. And we've seen that actually with some of our companies who have had venture term sheets and they just don't really like the terms. They don't know where to turn to. They sort of turn to us as, hey, like we could actually raise $3 to $5 million ourselves. We feel pretty confident in our ability to do that. We can set our valuation in a way that we think is fair, and we'll let the market decide if that's fair, if they want to participate or not. We don't have to give up a board role or a governance role. We bundle all the investors with the custodian, so you don't want to have a messy cap table. And so I think feeling like you can take back control over your fundraising
Yep.
from those investor is critical, I think, for some companies in some circumstances.
I think it's attractive to most companies. I was treading lightly around the control word when I mentioned before. Glad you were able to dive in there. I think it's a very clear
Well,
advantage.
and when I say control, I mean like, and I've been in this position where you can just feel at the whim of others who are outside your organization, and that like, ultimately you're looking for capital, you don't have capital. And so you need capital from somewhere.
Yes.
And if there's only one source of capital, it's just a supply and demand question. That your demand is high and the supply is low. And so naturally, you're going to have to pay a premium to get access to that resource. That's just how it works. And so if you can increase your supply by using this new path that previously was unavailable to you, increasing the supply is good for you as the person who's the buyer. And so it's a very good tool in the toolkit to understand and to know and to evaluate. And not every deal is right for every path, but it's a path that I think every entrepreneur should know and evaluate each time they're doing a fundraising.
So if an entrepreneur is considering going down this path and they, of course, needed to work, supply, demand, hey, we need the capital at least to scale and do what we want to do in these next periods of time. What recommendations do you have for them to be able to hit their goal? I look at marketing as a series of tests. I think it could be applied to entrepreneurship, growth as a whole. What should founders who are looking to issue shares via Reg CF test towards their own model to see success on their capital raise?
So I'd say my first answer would be to have a plan,
Yes.
a loosely held plan that you're willing to change and you're willing to update as you gather more information, but a plan, like a written down actual plan that you can consult and read and look at and edit. I think that just goes a long way in general in helping you frame your own thoughts when you're trying to accomplish a goal. So that would be number one. Number two would be doing the groundwork. Like, yes, it's really helpful to do digital. Yes, it's really helpful to do that sort of amplification and marketing, but at the, you still need to get somebody to actually activate from I'm interested to I'm parting with my hard-earned cash to buy your equity. Get on the phone. Like nothing replaces that. Nothing replaces a founder selling their vision and their idea on the phone to investors. And so that's what I would do. Like if I were embarking on my own Reg CF raise, I would have a plan. And the day I went live, I would have a list of as many investors as I could think of, but at least 50 to 100 investors. I'd have a list of them and I would call all of them. and I would say, hey, I'm doing this really great thing. I don't know if you've heard of it or not. We just launched on Netcapital. I'd love to send you the link. Let me tell you a bit about it. Certainly no pressure to participate, but we have plans X, Y, and Z. This is probably our only raise that we're going to do. If you want to participate, then now would be the time. Just no replacement for that interaction that you can have with an investor. So that's what I would do. And then once you start to have success, hopefully, that's when you want to really amplify. That's when you really want to turn to a DNA or other aspects of more digital outreach, using and leveraging the platform and the ability that you have to generally solicit to amplify your message.
100%. That groundwork, that calling of investors, like you said, you're not asking for money. You're offering them the opportunity to be part to own part of the company.
Right.
You're selling the shares. I like to frame it as, can you back the company, and at any level? Again, minimums are low, and also, can you share these requests? Can you post to your audience? Can you share this at the office? Can you do a social post about it? I find that goes a long way. If you have 90 people posting about the business over 90
Yeah.
days,
And
yeah,
and lower the activation energy. It's just what you said triggered the story I have of a friend
yeah,
of mine who used the platform, and he was talking to angel investors, like larger angel investors, and at the end of the call he would do a temperature scale, which is a classic like sales technique, which is on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being you can't wait to hang up the phone and never talk to me or think about me again, and at 10 being you've never been this excited, you're definitely in on whatever I'm selling you. But what he would say is the 1, and then the 10 is, I definitely invest $100 in this. And the investor would be like, well, $100. I mean, sure, I'm a 10. Great. Here's the link. You can go and do that. And so it lowered, and he got, he had all these angel investors sort of on the hook, 25, 50, 100K. And through Netcapital, he got some of them in at 25, 50K, but he also got some of them in at like 5K and 10K.
yeah.
Some of them are like awesome people that he can now call once a month or whenever he needs advice because they're in his deal. And that was tremendously valuable to him. And he didn't think he'd be able to close them without the platform, but just having a place and like structure around, hey, you just have to click this button. It's really not that hard. It's not that complicated. You don't got to, print my deal documents, sign it, notarize it, upload it, send it over, take down my wiring instructions, go to your bank, give them your ID. Like you just click the button and you're done. And you can invest as little or as much as you're comfortable with. It does really help with respect to lowering the activation energy to getting even real professional investors who do this all the time to be like, you know what? Sure, I like this guy. I like this girl. Let's go.
I can tell you, I'm going to be sharing the link of that section of the video with some founders. I really like that 1 through 10. I don't know if you got that from your sales training
I
course.
did. Yeah.
Maybe share the link to that. That's powerful. And like you said, $100. And I find naturally you share that with somebody and it's, playing the $5 blackjack table or the 25 or 100, or, some people are in high limits. It's that much more meaningful to them. So they're going to come in at the 5K level or 1,000. They should all average out to a good level. And likely they're going to talk about it. Probably not going to invest and never bring it up again. And peer-to-peer marketing is going to occur. I think that's a fantastic recommendation. What about optimization? What if it's not working right out of the gate? Or if it is and you're trying to do more of what's delivering for you, what are some tips towards optimizing the campaign?
With respect to the campaign specifically,
The fundraise, the Netcapital. I think, yeah, keeping it around the Netcapital reg CF.
yeah, I mean, you got to pay attention. That's number one. You have to be on the ball. You can't
Yeah.
optimize anything if you don't know what's happening. And so, being aware of what's successful, keeping track of your metrics, that's the number one importance. And then you really want to obviously, naturally pour more fuel on the fires that are burning and shift your focus away from things that maybe aren't you're not seeing the return on capital that you'd like to see. I think another if it's really not working, I also think that you can like take a breath. I think sometimes you get caught up in the momentum, in the desire to create momentum. But if what you're doing isn't working, you're not happy with it, you don't feel like you're getting a good return on your own investment of energy, I personally think it's okay. Okay, let's take a breath. Let's regather ourselves. Let's consult our plan, and let's maybe like not relaunch because you don't take the offering down, but just recenter yourself, take a week, take 2 weeks, whatever feels right, and then get back to the ground running. It might feel like a long time to you, but in the scheme of things and to the outside world and to investors, you can make that work. And I think sometimes you get on this treadmill of activity and you feel like you can't stop it. And so you're spending money, time, and it's not working. And you kind of like dig yourself into a hole. So I think it's okay to just pause and reevaluate if it's really not working.
Pause, regroup, come up with a new plan, and get back into that groundwork, and then amplify from there. But after you've recentered, you get that to a good point. Hey, now the campaign's showing a good return. There's X amount of months, weeks left. How do you scale? Any tips, any examples you've seen from the top issuers on your platform?
Certainly. Hire Jason Frishman at DNA for sure. That helps. Um, I'd say that we've had quite a few success stories that really use different strategies. I think there's a lot of, I think it's hard to differentiate between optimization and scale in this context because really scaling is optimizing. You want to find something that works, and then you want to really focus on that and invest your time, attention, energy, or cash or resources into that strategy to make sure that you get the most out of it. I think in general, when it comes to scaling, you also need to persevere. I think it's probably true with scaling and optimization. Like not everything is going to work overnight, and you have to be, you have to have conviction on what you're doing. And so, if you think this is a good strategy, persevere, let it run its course, pause if you need to, but if you still believe in it, then persevere. It might sound like conflicting advice, but you just have to feel it and use your intuition and hopefully data to make informed decisions on whether you want to continue and whether you think that's a right path to scale or not.
Persevere through it. Uh, look at the time, look at what's left, and really maximize. It's something I notice as a differentiator from companies that raise 1 million to companies that raise multiple 7 figures, cap
Yeah.
out their full amount, is doubling down on what's
Yeah.
working, letting the data direct their decisions, like you're saying, and then just pushing through it.
I guess I'd add to that, don't get comfortable. Like just because like marketing changes every day, right? So like you
Oh,
could
yeah.
have a great week and then you get comfortable and the next week doesn't go as well. What happened, right? So don't take your eye off the ball. Like if you have a goal to raise $5 million and you raised $1 million in the first week, that doesn't mean you're about to raise $4 million in the next 4 weeks. It means you have a great start, a great ability to optimize and scale, but don't take your eye off the ball. Don't get comfortable and continue to push, because that's ultimately what drives transactions.
I heard a mic drop there. That's
All
it's,
right,
it's
sounds good.
that's powerful stuff, Jason. And as we begin to wrap up, you know, want to be able to make more information available to listeners, to viewers. Uh, but just recapping everything you've talked about here, I think there's so much for founders to look at, whether they're considering the vehicle, whether they're already in the process of filing a Form C, already speaking to Netcapital, already live on Netcapital. You've given so many great tips here. What are some closing thoughts you want to leave the audience with, and what are the best ways for them to get in contact with you? What are the best ways for them to potentially start the process with Netcapital or learn more?
Yeah, well, I'm certainly open. My email's open. It's just jason@netcapital.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to go the more general route, help@netcapital.com is always a great place to start. I think that sort of my closing thoughts are it's more about entrepreneurship in general, and my belief that my strong belief that this is a tool that should be in the tool belt of every successful entrepreneur. And that doesn't mean that every round that you do should have a Reg CF component to it, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't. And so it should be something that you really seriously evaluate each time you're embarking on a fundraising plan. And never wait too late to start your next round. If you're not cash flow positive, that's another mistake founders make, is they wait until they need the money, and then you're back to that supply and demand issue where your demand is really high. So it's always best to fundraise from a position of strength. And so think about your fundraising, be mindful about it, and consider this path in every round that you do. Can I bring my community together to be successful? Is that important to me? Could that be important to my brand? Could I use this in connection with a product launch? Is there something new about my business that I really want to amplify? And I'm going to do that anyway, so I might as well connect my fundraising to this other marketing push that I'm doing. I think there are dozens of reasons why it could be a good fit for any company at any given time.
Echo that statement and highly recommend you take Jason up on that opportunity and reach out. Jason, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to create content with us here. I am personally glad that you moved away from the world of scientific research and found the inefficiencies in fundraising and have built these more streamlined approaches towards raising capital. I can attest to, I'll use the word impact again, that you're making, that Netcapital is making for the founders that you work with directly, for the investors, and believe that's going to pan out even further over time for them personally. And you are at the forefront of the industry. You are a leader. So I taken notes myself on different recommendations, different sayings I could later quote you on, but different ideas that can be incorporated for founders. So thank you for taking the time to do this for listeners and viewers.
You got it. Very nice of you to say. And obviously that's why we do what we do, is to have that impact. So, and I feel the same about you. So good to be here. Glad to make content. We can keep doing it, and we'll talk soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next time. Take care.